Yeah, tell me, how was it working with me? Joyous? You better say joyous. Yeah.
Man, it was good. Honestly, I came in as a fan, to be honest. And so in the beginning, there was a lot of curiosity about, what it was going to be like. Knowing that you had a theater background, that was something that I really admired. I hadn't worked with very many actors, at least professionally, who had done theater, and this job had quite a few. So, for me, I was really just excited to get into the room and do something that kind of felt like the old days. And, I was just in there just taking my little notes, man. It was always a good time, and, the morale was high. How about you, man? How was your experience? What was your experience like working with me?
I mean, it sounds sycophantic, but I was blown away by your work. I was so staggered by your poise and the kind of nobility that you brought to Bobby, but also this kind of volcanic. You went from being so calm between takes and so still, and then this kind of fire like blew up, and it was an extraordinary thing to witness. So it was one of the great treats of this, was getting to work with you, mate. And
Appreciate it, man.
now just so excited to see what else is coming. I'm like desperate to hear stories about Lana and how it's going over in Berlin. I know Warner Brothers, I'm gagging to ask questions, but Warner Brothers will probably kill us. It was a real treat, and it's thrilling for me watching all of the things you've got coming out. Can't wait to see Candyman. I'm obsessed with trailers. The Candyman trailer has stopped me from sleeping. So
awesome. I'm excited. So given that this is a historical film where we represent actual characters from history, how did you prepare for a task like that? How important was it for you to be accurate in your portrayal?
For me, one of the great joys of what we get to do, particularly when you play real people, is to learn, to just sort of immerse yourself in the world of things, whether it ends up being useful for the character or not. But just as a human being, it's kind of, it's the way that progress. So I read a lot around Tom Hayden, who I just admired extraordinarily, from books he'd written to video clips to reading what Jane Fonda wrote beautifully. He ended up married to Jane Fonda later in his life, and she wrote beautifully about him on her website. And I try and sort of by osmosis take up as much of that information as possible, but then almost let it all go and just play what Aaron had written and his word. And hope that some of the information that you've accrued kind of bleeds out of the character somewhere. But how about you, man?
Yeah, I didn't approach this like a biopic. I think that was one of the first things Aaron said in the rehearsals, is that it's not a biopic. Now that doesn't take away the responsibility to be authentic with the character. I still did my research. I read his books, his autobiography. I watched some YouTube clips and things like that, and try to learn a little bit about more of his vocal cadence, the way that he expressed himself. But for me, it was so important to zone in, or to key in on the essence of Bobby Seale, or the essence of what was important to him throughout this particular trial. What was important and how he held on to his humanity and his manhood and his dignity. And once I found an idea of how he would go about that, then the rest was, like you said, leaning on the text that Aaron provided us, and really hoping that some things in my research stuck to the wall. As I was experimenting with that process.
It's always so interesting what it is that thing that you end up holding on to, and this is so odd, but there was something in a lot of the photographs of Tom that he would he'd wear these quite sort of thick, well-worn canvas shirts that you could kind of you imagine had a huge history to them and were very robust and sort of seemingly totally lacking in vanity. And weirdly, that the idea of this kind of well-worn fabric with great integrity ended up being something that I found oddly useful.
Wow.
Which is a very odd way of putting it, but yeah. So there's, given the world we're in at the moment, the film seems to sort of have an eerie relevance to what we're living through, even though it was set in the late 60s. What do you hope that people take away from the movie, or what did you feel like you took away when you read this piece, and how relevant it is now?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a refrain that repeats itself in the trailer, which is the whole world is watching. You know, and we're definitely in a moment right now where no one can afford to look away from what's happening in the world. So one, I hope that it's a call to action in terms of causing people to pay attention and to really be informed and to direct their attention to what is happening in this changing world. And then two, you know, our film is about, you know, a bunch of guys from various backgrounds who did go to Chicago to stand up for what they believed in. You know, whether they went together or not, they did go and voice their opinion in order to stand up for a cause and to stand up for what they believed in. And they were faced throughout the trial and, you know, with a lot of decisions, you know, about courage and about backing down and standing up. And so I think that our film can be an example of using your voice for the right cause and knowing that there's a lot of change that can be made if you use your voice for the right reason and to pay attention, because now is a very particular moment in time where it's important to use your voice and to use your resources. Everybody has a role to play. So I think that's one of the central messages that I think can be taken away from our film. How about yourself? What would you say?
Honestly, I think you've put it beautifully. I think it was something that Robert Kennedy Jr. said about democracy is a very messy thing. But I think this film shows that, but the fight for equality is as urgent now as it's ever been. And my God, we need to fight for it. There was something, again, that Jane Fonda said about Tom Hayden said to her just as he was dying, that it was seeing people willing to lay down their lives for their beliefs was what changed him, and and that's stuck with me, and really kind of underlined that urgency. So yeah.